there. In this video I'm going to introduce you to the object library in FluidDesigner for 3D lighting. You can open up the object library by clicking the object library button and then clicking where it says O3D templates. Now the first column are some special folders, some template folders, some tessellated design folders and some parametric and Voronoi lighting folders. The three columns on the right all listed patterns. They're all kind of similar objects. Now there are two types of patterns that we have on our system. There are some basically 3D NURBS curve patterns, and it's not labeled 3D, it's just a normal name. And there are some special ones which are just 2D. So for example, if I select patterns 2D crosses, and if I click on the cross, I could select cross 2D and then click OK, and I could select another cross and click OK. Now these objects are Bezier objects, and if I just open up the properties panel, you'll see that they've got a thickness, a Z dimension of 2mm, and that's controlled by this extrude amount of 1mm. So in other words, it's 1mm above the grid and 1mm below the grid. Now these are Bezier curves, these objects, and I tend to use them mostly for engraving, in other words cutting out part of another object, but you can use them to join together, but it's quite difficult because you have to save them, you have to convert them to meshes, save them, run them through NetFab, bring them back in, etc, etc. Because if you just if I just select this one and if I just overlap them, if I were to simply highlight the two of them, so I've just held down the shift key and highlight the two of them, if I go to Tools, Object Tools and Join, notice they get messed up. So Bezier curves are not very good for actually joining together. Alright, so I do use them sometimes, but not greatly. It does depend on what you're doing. What I would much prefer to do is to use, so if I just go to View and Top View, is use the NURBS curve ones. So if I go to Patterns Hearts, for example, these objects are also curves, but they're actually NURBS curves. So if I select Heart 13 and put it on the workspace, and if I just select another heart, so I'll select number 15 and put it on the workspace. Now the beauty about these is that if I just overlap them and hold down the shift key and go to Tools, Object Tools and Join, nothing strange happens, and what you will find is that they will 3D print really well. So these are NURBS curves, and they're really good, I find, for 3D printing. Now if I just do Control Z and undo and just separate those two out, another consideration to make about these objects is they are all the default thickness of 1x2. 1x2. So the Z value here for all of these objects is 2mm deep. Now if you wanted to set that to a different value, you can delete the bevel object there in the properties panel, and you can go to the library, the object library, and if you go to templates cross-section bevel objects, now there is a special bevel object here which is for support rings, which I'll discuss later in this video, but I'm going to select this object here, which is a cross-section 1, and click OK. And if I just click outside the yellow box, that object, which is also a NURBS curve, will be placed right in the middle of the screen. And the default size of that object, I'll just switch this window down a bit, is 1mm by 1mm. So if I select my heart now and select this cross-section rectangular bevel object, that will now be 1mm deep, which we can see as the Z value, and 1mm thick. So if we select the other heart and delete the bevel object and select cross-section rectangular bevel object, that will also be 1mm deep. So our bevel object that's in the middle of the screen here, now controlling both of these. So if I change Y to 10 or whatever, so I'll set it at 3mm, they'll both be 3mm deep. So you can join NURBS curves together really well. You can set the dimensions of them really well by using bevel objects. Now what you've got to be careful of is if I select the heart on the right and scale it, notice the thickness is now very different from the one on the left. you've got to be very careful when you scale these objects. Go into edit mode. So if I highlight the heart on the left, press tab to go into edit mode, highlight the control points with A and then S for scale, notice that the thickness of the one on the left hasn't changed. The thickness of the one on the left is still 3 millimeters like the bevel object. It's something you've got to always be wary of. Always go into edit mode when you scale these if you want to know the dimensions, and you really do for 3D printing. Don't join those two objects together now, because this one on the right hasn't been scaled properly. I would delete it and start again. The one on the left is fine. Okay, now where can we use these objects? Well, if I just go to Open Recent, all of these objects around here in the boxes are in fact NURBS curves. They've all got the same thickness as defined in the Properties panel by the cross-section rectangular bevel object. So if I was to select that one, I think it's this one here. No, that's the one on the top, so it's this one. So if you can see, all of the ones on the boxes around the outside, they're all changing as I change this bevel object. So they're all controlled by the same bevel object there. The frame itself is also a rectangular bevel object, but notice I've given the additional name frame there because it's got a different thickness from all the ones around the outside. So the ones around the outside are just patterns as found in the object library. So all over here, all of these patterns, and they can be just simply joined together. Now, what to be careful of is the support ring at the top here. The support ring has in fact got a special bevel object, and it's labelled SR. I did mention it a little bit earlier. And if I select the SR bevel object in the outliner panel on the left, if I change the Y dimension, you can see the thickness of this support ring is changing, so that you can see it as, and the bevel object below in yellow is changing. But what's important, if I change X, notice that all the thickness is going on the outside of that support ring. So in other words, the internal dimension is not changing. So it's very important that you choose this bevel object here for the support ring at the top, and these bevel objects for other things, because they function slightly differently. Okay, now the actual frame itself, the outline frame itself, is also available in the object library under lighting frames, and also the support rings can be found here. So we've got a cuboidal frame there, but you can use different frames. But the support rings at the top can be found here and a little bit further down, and the support flap can also be found there. So these are the support flaps at the top here. Now, one other object library that I just want to consider in this video is the first one, which is the light bulb fittings. There are some cutter diameters tools, so you can cut into objects and make space for the cable to go through. But there are also some candle light and golf ball filaments here as well, just to put on the screen to just generally see what size your light fitting is. Now, what's important to understand about these is that the blue section, the blue filament there, is E14 and it is 35 millimeters diameter, and the length is defined by E14 candle filament, but do not rely on the cable at the top or the screw fitting that the bulb goes into. The dimensions of those are not necessarily accurate, and you do need to be aware of that. Very important to consider. So the length and the diameter of the bulb is fine, but do not rely on any of the other dimensions as shown for these objects. And so that's all of the light bulb fittings. The bulb dimensions are accurate in terms of diameter and length, but do not take into account do not use the cable fittings above. You must measure those out yourself and be careful when you're